So the world had a very clear moment there in the hours and the days, the weeks, the months, as it were, after October 7th, to look at the situation where you had a 7th century Islamist death cult, a group that aspires to return its would-be caliphate to the 7th century, a group whose founding charter, which is publicly available, by the way, the Hamas charter is available for all to see. It calls for the death not merely of all Jews, but also of all so-called infidels, by which they, of course, mean Christians and, frankly, non-Sharia supremacist Muslims as well. So the world had a very crisp and clean opportunity, that is, to look at this dichotomy between this horrific group of Islamist barbarians on the one hand and the free and flourishing state of Israel, the literal home of the Bible, on the other hand. And the world struggled. The world struggled mightily. Opinion makers, thought leaders, political leaders, elected officials, commentators, everyone seemed to struggle with who to side here. I think it was actually one day after, it was October 8th, if memory serves, 2023, at Harvard University, purportedly the greatest institution of education in America, if not the world. You had 33 student groups. While the blood was still dry, literally the Hamas terrorists were still running throughout Israel. They had not even captured all of them yet. And the 33 Harvard student group leaders affixed their names to a letter saying that the Jews of Israel were morally culpable. They were responsible for their own barbaric genocide, for the butchering of babies in ovens, the execution of Holocaust survivors, execution style in their kitchens, the mass raping and sexual violence and pillaging, all of that there. So, John, that does take us to what you aptly described to as a civilizational moment or a civilizational wake-up call, when you are unable fundamentally to discern between who is morally right and who is morally wrong, between a horrific, barbaric group of radical Islamic jihadists and the state of Israel, the Jewish people, the original people of the book, then you have reached the point where you are fundamentally struggling with the most basic questions in humanity there. So that really is where I begin in my book, Israel and Civilization there. And we start talking in those early chapters of the book, what is Western civilization? Fundamentally, only a people that understands what their civilizational inheritance is, only who they are, what they stand for, only a people, a group of nations, a group of peoples collectively, only those folks who understand the answers to those questions will be well equipped in order to fight for them. It doesn't make any sense, after all, that we would be willing and able, perhaps even eager, to fight back against the forces that threaten to conquer and subjugate us if we don't even know who we are, what we stand for in the first place there. So I argue pretty forthrightly in the book. There's the classical formation of Western civilization. So the American political scientist Leo Strauss, longtime University of Chicago political scientist, he's really credited above all with, I think, popularizing the notion that what we today call Western civilization is this fusion of reason and revelation, of the Greco-Roman tradition of reason with revelation, Jerusalem, and the Bible itself. In the book, I actually really argue, I accept that premise, but I argue that if one is going to be even more important to what we call Western civilization, it's actually the Bible. It's actually civilization. It's actually revelation there. And I argue the Western civilization actually began with God's revelation to Moses and the Israelites at Mount Sinai, and that is the original people of the book and what a pope famously described to as the great Gentile offshoot, Christendom more generally. That is what built Western civilization there. So if we're going to ultimately put Humpty Dumpty back together again and fortify us to ultimately withstand these hegemonic forces, these very, very real threats that we face there, we have to understand who we are and what we stand for there. And to me, the Judeo-Christian civilizational inheritance, the biblical inheritance itself, that is the crux, the core of what it means to be the West. And that is why I think the October 7, 2023 pogrom was a horrific assault, not merely for the Jewish people, not merely for the Jewish state, but for Western civilization as such.